I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. You may have heard that antennas for FPV come in either linear or circular polarized varieties, and the circular polarized ones can be either left hand or right hand. But which is better, left hand, right hand, or linear? That's what we're going to learn today. Think of antenna polarization as being on a scale, with linear polarization in the middle of the scale, and left-hand polarization at one end and right-hand polarization at the other end. Every antenna transmits a signal that is somewhere on that scale. For example, the little dipole antenna on a little micro quad like this is linear polarized and is essentially 100% linear. And we can have other antennas like this is the Lumineer Axi patch. It is a circular polarized patch antenna, and you can see it from the fact that it's marked with an R and a little right-hand circle. This is a right-hand polarized antenna. This is a Strix Hoot antenna, and it's got a big R on it to indicate that it's right-hand polarized. So any antenna can be linear, right-hand, or left-hand polarized. So we could start by asking the question, which is better, linear or circular polarization? And the answer is, it depends. Circular polarized signals are almost always going to give you better video reception than linear signals because circular polarized signals are good at eliminating a thing called multipath, which messes up signals. Circular polarized is very good at getting rid of that. Linear antennas are not very good at dealing with multipath, but of course they have certain advantages. They're much smaller and lighter and easier to build than circular polarized ones. So, but in terms of reception, circular polarized is seldom going to be worse. Let's put it that way. In a very clean RF environment with no multipath, you might get just as good a signal with a linear antenna as with a circular. But as the more difficult the environment is, the more multipath is in the environment, the more of an advantage a circular polarized antenna is going to have. So then, which is better, left hand or right hand circular polarized? And the answer is, it doesn't matter. Neither left hand nor right hand is better. The only thing that matters is that what's on the quad match what's on your goggles. Because if you have a left hand polarized antenna on your quad, but a right hand polarized antenna on your goggles, they are not going to be able to talk to each other very well. And vice versa. If you have a right hand on your quad and a left hand on your goggles, they're not going to be able to talk to each other very well. In fact, it's because right hand antennas don't pick up left hand signals and vice versa that circular polarized antennas are very good at getting rid of multipath. So which is better, left hand or right hand? Neither. The only thing that really matters is that you match what's on your quad with what's on your goggles. But let's dig a little deeper because there actually is a scenario where you might prefer left hand or right hand. And that scenario is if you have to be very close to someone else's channel, like you're trying to get 8 pilots in the air, like at a big event like the International Open, right? You got 8 pilots in the air and you're using channels race band 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If you want to make really sure that those channels don't interfere with each other, you can alternate polarization in adjacent channels. So channel 1 will use left-hand antennas, channel 2 will use right-hand, 3 will use left-hand, 4 will use right-hand. And because the left-hand antennas don't see the right-hand signals very well, it'll give improved separation between those channels. Now, most of the time that's not going to matter because most of us are not very often flying where we're trying to get 8 pilots in the air all at once with a whole lot of coordination. But if you are at your flight, most people fly right-hand. That's just what most people tend to buy. And if you notice that people are kind of stomping on signals at your flight field, maybe you should invest in some left-hand polarized antennas to give yourself just that little bit of extra protection against their interference. But there's a downside. If they're all flying right-hand and you have left-hand on your goggles, then it won't be very easy for you to spectate on their signals. You'll see their signal breaking up when they still see perfectly good signal. So you might think, well, I'm going to be a clever guy. I'm going to put one left hand and one right hand antenna on my goggles. I got diversity. I'm going to get the best of both worlds. And the problem with that is that you have just killed your diversity system. Because in that scenario, if you've got a left hand antenna on your quad, the left-hand antenna on your goggles is mostly going to be getting the better signal. And the right-hand one is mostly not going to be doing very much. But if you want to make sure that you can switch back and forth between left and right-hand polarization, like for example, if you're flying left-hand, but everybody else at your field is flying right-hand, or if you're at a big event and half the pilots are flying left and half the pilots are flying right and you just don't want to think about switching back and forth, you could put a left and a right on your goggle. You wouldn't have diversity anymore, but maybe that's a trade-off you're willing to make in order to not have to swap the antennas out on your goggle when you switch between left and right on your quad. There's one more thing that we got to talk about here, and that is the interaction between a linear antenna and a circular antenna. And it turns out that when you have a left-hand antenna on the quad and a right hand on the goggle, there is a massive amount of attenuation, like 15 or even as much as 30 dB, which in case you don't know RF, that's a lot. There's a lot of loss between them. But between a linear antenna and a circular antenna, there's only a little bit of loss. It's about 3 dB of loss, which is not nothing, but it's livable. And so a lot of times you'll see people who have linear antennas on their quads using circulars on their goggles just because they don't want to swap them out. And it's okay. It's not that bad. And that's another scenario you might end up in where the mismatch between the linear and the circular might not actually matter too much. You seldom see people putting linears on their goggles, and that's how they get away with it. Well, anyway, now you know which is better, left hand or right hand. The answer is probably neither. But if there's somebody right next to you who's flying left, you might want to fly right in order to avoid interference, or vice versa. Thank you guys so much for watching. Happy flying.